G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to talk to you about shoulder pain. And more specifically, I want to show you how to self-assess, self-diagnose and self-treat whether any first rib dysfunction is contributing to your shoulder pain. Now, this may sound a little bit strange because shoulder pain is such a broad topic, but interestingly enough, there are a lot of common root underlying issues that can conspire against a healthy shoulder to lead it down the path of something becoming sore or injured. So if you are someone who has like a bursitis or an impingement, a rotator cuff tear or a supraspinatus tear specifically, biceps tendonitis or anything like that, any of those musculoskeletal issues that we tend to get a problem with in terms of our shoulders, it's always important to figure out whether your first rib is contributing to your symptoms or even causing your symptoms in a way that you didn't realize. So before we get into it, obviously, if you're going to enjoy this video, if you find it helpful, please consider leaving a like rating down below. Consider subscribing to the channel if you're new, if you enjoyed this kind of information, if you find it helpful. That's a great way to support the channel and also sort of grow along with us. So with that being said, this first rib is really important because it's a centerpiece almost of a lot of neck dysfunction, upper back dysfunction, and shoulder dysfunction because of where it is. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, as most people are, the first rib basically is literally the first rib at the top of your upper back or the top of your rib cage, or at least that's the area that we're most interested in. Now, it tends to surprise a lot of people that obviously with your collarbone, your first rib at the front is essentially right underneath the collarbone on the inside. But the interesting thing is your body wraps that around and it attaches up into the base of your neck. So the back of that first rib and the aspect of the first rib that we're most interested in for the purpose of this video is actually right at the top underneath those upper traps. And it tends to sit almost sort of above the level of your collarbone at the front. And this is such an important piece of the puzzle to figure out because it is so central, as I said. If you become restricted and dysfunctional in this area, it has the tendency to affect your neck, has the tendency to affect your shoulder, your upper back, your chest, all these sorts of things. So if you have the capacity to self-diagnose and then self-treat this condition, then you can take a really big piece of the puzzle and understand where that fits into your dysfunction. So the first thing we want to get you to do is, before we get to that first rib, we want to do a pre-test, a test that we're going to get you to repeat after doing this exercise so that you can see immediately what's changed. So for example, if you have shoulder pain just by lifting your arm up, if we use just shoulder flexion as the piece that we're sort of valuing for the purposes of this video, for you it could be someone like reaching behind your back, it could be reaching out in front, it could be turning your neck potentially as the reason that gives you some of that shoulder pain. Choose the thing that you feel works best. So for the purposes of this, we can do potentially some rotation through the neck side to side, but then also lifting our arms up as far as we feel comfortable. And what I'll do here, just so that you can see this hopefully, I'll go as far as I feel comfortable before I need to lift my rib cage up. So I want to keep my rib cage straight. And I just want to lift my arms up as far as I can before I want to start to arch backwards at the same time. So rib cage stays down, go as far back as I feel comfortable. Now I'll do this side, so take note of how far this goes. And then I don't have any shoulder pain, but I want to show you how important that first rib or normal first rib motion is to just general normal shoulder motion as a whole. So even if you don't have shoulder pain, but you want your shoulders to function a little bit better, this is also a great exercise to do. So essentially all you need is a ball of some sort. Now you can use a tennis ball if you want something that's a little bit softer. I love to use a lacrosse ball. If you've been watching the channel before, you'll know that this exercise we're about to go through is such a versatile exercise. It's really, really beneficial for a lot of different things. But what we want to get you to use is we want you to use a ball that feels very comfortable for you. You can relax while you're doing it. If it's too hard, you won't be able to relax as much. If it's too soft, you probably won't make enough change for this to be worthwhile. But you can do this exercise lying down on your back, which I will in a second. You can also do it leaning up against a wall or standing up against a wall. Again, choose a surface and a ball density that you feel very comfortable with, that when you do your test and retest, you can see a genuine change. So all we need to do with this, and as I said, it works fantastically as a diagnostic exercise just as much as it does a treatment. So we're going to get 2 for 1 from this exercise. Now what we want to do with the ball, we're going to take the ball and place it onto that first rib. Now if you don't know where that first rib is specifically, you'll find it, but a great place to start is at the bump at the base of the neck. Now this bump generally represents the bottom cervical or neck segment. So the first rib is literally the next bump down from that. Well, that's the level that we want to work from. So I'm going to place the ball on that bump. So the bump just below the big bump at the base of the neck. And we want to get the ball just to roll out a little bit. So somewhere between the tip of the shoulder blade and that bump, in the middle there, you're going to be on the first rib. But more specifically, you'll be able to find it once you know exactly what feels tender, what feels tight, and what feels restricted. So what we want to get you to do is take that ball, place it in that area. So again, the bump just below, and then you come out to the side about midway between the spine in the middle and the tip of the shoulder blade. We just want to get you to move the ball around and go hunting for something that feels a little bit restricted and sore. Now, because of where it is, you might feel like the ball wants to shoot out the top. So if you're game, you can lift your hips up off the ground a little bit just to tilt backwards on that to get a little bit more pressure in on that spot. I also like to roll a little bit to that side just to bias it. I get a little bit better purchase on that spot. Now again, if you're not sure whether you've found a juicy spot, compare it to the same spot on the other side. And then essentially what you'll find is one side will feel a little bit less restricted than the other. One side will have the ball sink in a bit easier than the other. We obviously want you to be on the area that feels the most restricted. It's potentially quite tender for a lot of people. So again, you'll know pretty much where you are when you hit it. It will just feel a little bit uncomfortable. So for me, I found a little bit of a tender spot here. So I feel like I'm on the rib itself. The other interesting thing about this first rib is that we tend to see a lot of trigger points or knots develop over the top of that if it is dysfunctional. So you're someone that always feels like you've got knots in your upper traps and knots at the base of your neck that are quite tender. You might find that those knots are actually responding to a dysfunctional first rib. So just by trigger pointing those muscles, that alone won't solve anything. Those muscles will keep becoming sore and tender until we restore some normal motion to this first rib and then touch on why it's become dysfunctional in the first place, which we'll do. Now, so you've got two options with this exercise. We can get you to stay here and just gently let the ball press in. If it's really tender, just take a couple of deep breaths, just try and relax into this as best as possible. Again, this is why the density of the ball is so important. And you can also play around with the surface that you're on as well. I'm on some grass, obviously. If I was on a harder surface, this would be more intense. So again, start there. If that feels a bit too easy for you, you want a little bit more emphasis in the exercise. What I'll get you to do is lift the arm up on the side that you're trying to work on. I'll get you to gently take your shoulder back as far as you feel comfortable with your elbow staying straight. So we're not going to bend the elbow. Keep it nice and straight. We're going to keep working through this. So I need to lift up a little bit. Keep working through this until you feel like you can get to the surface that you need to be on. Now this is a really powerful way because we're compressing the area of restriction and then we're using normal shoulder motion to restore some normal motion to that stiff segment. And then what you'll hopefully find in literally no time at all, and this is why we want to do a test and a retest, is if I come back up to this position, without seeing exactly how far I've gone, you can compare this to the start of the video. You should see that this is now going back a little bit further than what it was before. And that's literally because that restriction there that acts as a handbrake and doesn't let my shoulder express itself normally in the movement or the motion of shoulder flexion. As I release that handbrake, it now allows my shoulder to function more normally. So hopefully you can see with that demonstration that if you do have some subtle restriction through that first rib joint or that first rib area, it can basically force the shoulder to do something different. And it's one of the hidden causes for a lot of shoulder pain, or at least one of the hidden factors that its presence then causes something else to be loaded differently, whether it is a rotator cuff tendon or a bursa or something like that. So if we're just treating that general shoulder dysfunction and we're not taking the time to consider what may have caused that or may have contributed to that, then potentially we're going to have a hard time solving this and turning you into someone who used to have a shoulder problem long term. So again, as you can hopefully see with me, my shoulder now moves a lot better, it feels a lot freer than it did before, just by taking out that hidden restriction. So again, you can use that to hunt around and see. It's a very safe exercise to do. You can do that and then see what effect it has on your shoulder. Obviously, you can work in and around that area as well. It's not just the first rib, but the first rib's the main one, or the alpha in the area. It tends to be one that has the biggest impact. But then the next conversation we need to have is, why is that first rib dysfunctional in the first place? Why has one side become a bit of an issue and the other side's fine? Why is one side tender and tight, the other side potentially isn't, or isn't as much so as the other side? And in my experiences over the years, basically, the number one cause of first rib dysfunction, and it's not a very interesting topic of conversation for most people, is just the positions and the postures that you get that into. And the reason for that's quite simple, in that particularly if that is your mouse hand, or if that's the hand that you're, or the side so that you maybe lean up against the window while you're driving, or if you're sitting in a couch, that might be the side of the sofa that you sort of sink into more than the other. What I tend to see is that as those shoulders, the shoulder blade and the shoulder girdle as a whole tends to drop and roll forwards, the weight of the arm under gravity, or at least the position that we're in, we're constantly putting tension and pressure through the tissues that attach into our neck, through that first rib, through the upper back, through the tissue at the back of the shoulder. And over time, our body has no option but to respond to that and adapt to that by trying to stiffen and tighten and become more restricted to support that abnormal weight and that abnormal position. So if we want to have a really important conversation about how to stop that first rib from becoming stiff and tight again once you've freed it up, you need to make sure that you don't feel like you're hanging off those shoulders. You don't feel like you're sort of tensioning up that area consistently for potentially hours a day. You can try and take your shoulders back and accept the weight of those shoulders a little bit more. If you're at a desk, maybe make sure that your desk is here and not here and here. Make sure that everything's in a good position for you. Then we can stop that stiffness and tightness from returning. And if that is a foundational piece, an important puzzle piece to your shoulder pain and dysfunction, then we can have a really strong confidence that that's not going to come back long term. So as I said, like we always have to do on this channel, talking about ways to fix things is incomplete unless we're trying to boil it down and distill it down to those root issues. And in most cases, particularly most shoulder pain dysfunctions and things that go with that, if you're not having a strong conversation with yourself about your day-to-day postural habits and the shapes that you get those tissues into, then you're potentially missing the bigger picture of why all this is here in the first place. So with that being said, I hope you found that useful. Let me know in the comments down below how your test and retest went. As I said, please consider leaving a like on the video. Consider subscribing if you enjoy this information. If you want more of it to come, that'd be fantastic. But until next time, I'll see you then.